Shalom and warm welcome to the Middle East Report. In this program today, we shall be marking the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz-Birkenau, the largest of all the Nazi death camps by the Soviet Red Army, back on the 27th of January 1945, that marks International Holocaust Memorial Day. And on this program today, I have two very special guests and good friends of mine. They are Zalmi Unsdorfer, who is the chairman of Likud UK, and Len Grates, operations director for the International Christian Embassy at Jerusalem, UK. So, gentlemen, warm welcome to the program.
Nice to be with you again.
Great to be back.
And Zalmi, it's very good to see you. Just share with us, really, as a leader in the Jewish community, and you are a regular on the Middle East Report, and I, myself and our viewers love your contribution to the program. Just share with us, as a son of a Holocaust survivor, what does the International Holocaust Memorial Day mean to you?
Well, obviously, it's important to keep the greatest killing machine and the unbelievable numbers that perished. Well, they say I hate when they use the word perished. They were murdered. Absolutely. Okay, food perishes. The 6 million were murdered. It is important to keep that front and center in the education of the next generation. This is really what Memorial Day is about. But in our present times, we don't need memorials. We're seeing in the streets what happened 80 years ago. So I think we need less of memorials and more of daily education and steering people off of the propaganda and giving them the real truth.
Excellent. And Len, good to see you. And it's always a pleasure working with you on Jerusalem Dispatch, that can be seen on Revelation TV, the first Monday of every night between 7 and 8 p.m. Just share with us really what the International Christian Embassy at Jerusalem UK are doing to mark International Holocaust Memorial Day, and why it's so important that Christians honour and commemorate the horrors of the Holocaust.
Well, we'll be certainly encouraging churches to be praying on Sunday. I know my own church will be doing that, but also we'll be attending various events around the world. I myself will be going to the Foreign and Commonwealth Office on Monday with the Israeli Embassy to have a service there to remember. And I think it's just vitally important. You know, it's said that those who fail to remember the past are condemned to repeating it. And so remembering is a critical thing because we don't want these things ever to happen again. You know, the statement that's being said these days within the Jewish community and the Christian pro-Israel community is never again. And we've got to make sure that that is the case, and remembering it is all part of that.
Absolutely. And Zalmi, as I said in the intro to yourself, that you are son of a Holocaust survivor, a famous Holocaust survivor called Simha, who wrote the most compelling and remarkable account of the Holocaust through his book, The Yellow Star. Can you just share something about Simha's story of how he survived the horrors of the Holocaust and actually stayed alive and produced a family, which is in a way showing Hitler that the Jewish people won, not Hitler, and his final solution?
Yeah, my father was the youngest son and was taken with his parents. He was 19 years old. He was taken with his parents to Auschwitz in a cattle wagon. I think everybody knows about the cattle wagons that were used to go to the death camps. His parents were killed on the night of arrival. They were sent straight to the gas chamber. My father went to one of the barracks, one of the many barracks. And obviously, you may have seen pictures of those, where you have this barrack and you have this chimney stack which runs along the length of the barrack and then up to the ceiling. So it heats up the barrack. So that particular structure meant quite a lot to me when I went to visit Auschwitz, because my father had described that, because Dr. Joseph Mengele, the infamous Auschwitz doctor of death, would stand on this raised chimney structure along the length of the barrack and carry out his selection. Those to go to the right would be to death, and those to the left would be sent to work. And my father went through one of those selections. And he was 19, he was very, very thin, looked pretty sickly, wearing a beret and wire glasses. And the people who he was with in the line realized that people looking like him were being sent to the death line. So as he came under Mengele's thumb, somebody pushed him, and the entire line of prisoners fell forward in a complete melee. And Mengele screamed that he wants this started again. Go back, start again. Wieder machen, do it again. And so in the time that they regrouped, the people who were with my father, who was obviously one of the youngest in that group, they took his beret off, changed his appearance, turned whatever he was wearing inside out, took off his glasses, and they went under the line again, and Mengele let him go past. And when the selection was over, he screamed, "Wo ist der mit die Brillen?" Where is the guy with the glasses? He didn't want to miss one Jew that he had his eye on, that he wanted to put to death. That really meant something to me when I visited and I saw that structure. So that's what it really means to me. It's very personal to me. And when people deny the Holocaust, they say, well, what happened? Where are my grandparents? Where are my uncles and aunts and cousins? They're not here.
Yeah.
Somebody explain where they are? Ashes.
And Zalmi, tell us about the incredible act of defiance by your father, Simha, to actually celebrate Hanukkah with a Hanukkah candle in one of those Nazi death camps, knowing that if he was caught by the Nazis or the prison guards, this was instant death. And yet he defied the Nazis because of his love and his passion for the God of Israel.
Yes, I mean, Hanukkah is the festival of lights, it's the festival of miracles. And he and his inmates in that barrack decided that they were going to light a Hanukkah light to give some hope. We say a prayer over the Hanukkah light, as in those days, so in these days we shall see a miracle. And if I know you've read the book, but you'll see the actual prayer that was said at the time. I wouldn't dignify it by making a mistake with, the wording is very, very moving. But it was done in a shoe polish tin. They found a shoe polish tin. They found some oil from one of the machine tools that was used. And I don't know what they used for wicks and whatever, and they had to light it underneath the bunk. And I think one of the guards came in and smelled oil and they had to kind of like distract his attention. It was a very brave thing to do, and yes, they would have had serious consequences. They would kill people for doing anything, just for looking cross-eyed at one of the guards. You would be put to death.
As we are marking International Holocaust Memorial Day, I think it's important to actually hear stories of Holocaust survivors themselves. And this is an extract of an interview that I recorded last year with Manford Goldberg, and this is him sharing his encounter, how at the age of 6 that he saw Hitler.
Things I actually remember are very few. I recall my father taking a day off, and as a little boy he would take me out for a day. That there was a lovely castle with a beautiful playground adjoining in our town of Kassel. We would go on the tram right up to the castle grounds and spend the day not so much enjoying the inside of the castle as the things that would interest youngsters. And I remember on one such outing, when it was time to go home, we, in the afternoon, began traveling on the tram, got off at our tram stop, and we were walking home when we turned the corner, and there was a huge, huge crowd of people standing there, blocking not the road, but the pavements and sidewalk adjoining, so that it was impossible to walk through. When my father inquired what was happening, they said, well, gosh, you don't know Hitler is coming through here, and we are here to greet him. Well, once the climate was such by then, I was born in 1930, this must have been about 1935 maybe, 34, 35. The climate was such that had we continued walking, having heard that Hitler was coming, it would have caused raised eyebrows, and we would have been sort of suspects of being perhaps anti-Nazi, which was not something you wanted to promote. So my father stopped dutifully, like everybody else waiting there. And sure enough, after a while, a motor cavalcade came past, and in one of the large limousines, there, large as life, stood Hitler with his arm raised in the Hitler salute. My father actually held me up in his arms so that I could look over the heads of people in front, and I distinctly remember getting a glimpse of him as he went by in this motor cavalcade. That was a vivid memory. And my father actually, like everyone else, had to raise his arm and shout Heil Hitler in order not to stand out.
And that was the incredible Manford Goldberg, and you can watch the interview on our website on video on demand, but also our YouTube page as well, YouTube channel, which you haven't seen that, it's an absolute must. Len, just share with us your thoughts. We just heard Zalmi just share something very special about his father, Simha. Share with us the importance of Holocaust education and the importance of listening to testimonies firsthand of survivors and what they've been through, because, I mean, the Jewish people 80 years ago were subject to mass murder on an industrial scale. We're talking over 6 million lives, possibly even more, that perished at the hands of the Nazis. Just share why it's so important that we keep memories like Simha's alive, from Manford Goldberg as well, that the next generation know what happened on European soil 80 years ago.
Well, it's critically important, Simon. I haven't read Zalmi's father's book, but I'm going to get it on Amazon as soon as I get home. I've read quite a few books, and in fact, I mentioned a book to you earlier on by Martin Gilbert called The Final Journey, and Martin Gilbert has written quite extensively about the Holocaust. And I would recommend any viewers to start getting educated further on these things, and be upfront, because they are reliable, truthful sources. Martin Gilbert is of course, well, he's now passed on, but a very, very reliable historian for which he was honored by the government. But you know, it's so important that as Christian believers that we actually pass on the information and the news about the Holocaust to our children. And in our churches, we within the International Christian Embassy Jerusalem, we actually have a traveling display that goes around the country where we take it to schools and libraries and public places, and we've been doing that for about the last 10 years in order to educate people and bring truth, because there is such an attempt to rewrite history with regards to the Holocaust. We have got to be those that bear truthful. And somebody said that, in fact, I think I was listening to it on Radio 4 this morning, a Holocaust survivor being interviewed, saying that if we hear the story of a Holocaust survivor or anything to do with the Holocaust, we then become witnesses ourselves. And so that's so important that we pass on what we hear and teach it to the next generation. I think it's vitally important that the next generation are taught.
Len, I can testify that, because I remember back in the 80s when I was at school, my father would take me on walks with the dogs, with our dog then called Smudge, and my dad would just unpack the kind of history of the Second World War and the Holocaust, and just being very young back then, it still has penetrated my heart. And then obviously now the privilege of doing these programs and interviewing Holocaust survivors. So it just shows you're never too young to learn about the Holocaust. Zalmi, we know that we are marking the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz-Birkenau by the Red Army back on the 27th of January 1945, and this year represents the 80th anniversary of the end of the Holocaust. But share with us how this still casts a dark shadow over the Jewish people, and those wounds of the Holocaust are still deep, and how this has affected every Jewish community around the world.
Well, we thought it had gone away, but it's now been re-imported through Islamofascism or Islamo-Nazis, whatever they call them. The amount of propaganda and lies is astonishing. In the old days, they would deny the Holocaust, and now it took them 5 minutes to start denying October the 7th. So we're seeing history repeating itself, and as Len quite rightly said, if you fail to learn the lessons of history, we're doomed to repeat them. The difference between now and then is that now we have a Jewish state, we have a means of protection. I would just share with you that I went to Yad Vashem some years ago, to the Holocaust Museum in Jerusalem, and it had been the first time I'd been there for a long, long time. And there was a cattle wagon there which had literally been brought from the death camps and put on the original rails and original cobblestone. It was it wasn't a replica, it was a real cattle wagon on original rails. And I stood there and I remembered what my father had written about his journey in that cattle wagon with his parents on their final journey. And I was completely lost in thought. I put my hand on the wood of this cattle wagon, and I don't know how long I was standing there holding it, and I was a million miles away. And then eventually, as one does in an art gallery or whatever, you step back, you take 2 steps back away from the exhibit. And I bumped into someone, and I turned around to say sorry, and it was a young man in IDF uniform with a rifle over his back and a kippah on his head. And I thought, wow, I'm standing here touching something which arose because of our pure helplessness in the world. And I bump into now the new generation where we have the ability to defend ourselves, and we have a state that we can go to, because all borders were closed to us. You know, people could have escaped from Auschwitz, but where would they have gone to? Switzerland? Britain sent them back, you know?
Even the United States sent them back.
Even the United States.
The story of St. Louis. Can I share a little story about that cattle wagon that was at Yad Vashem? So I first saw that in 1996 when I was at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. And I remember seeing it very clearly. And if you look inside it, it still kind of lives with me today. In chalk was, if you see my son Ronnie, tell him that and that's it.
Yeah,
it's just
beyond belief.
It is absolutely beyond belief. We have another remarkable Holocaust survivor now to show you, and his name is Shaya Harit, and he survived the Holocaust, but he also went on to become one of Israel's top navigators in the Israeli Air Force. And this is him sharing his story of what he remembers back on the 1st of September 1939, when the Nazis bombed Warsaw. Shai, you spoke so well in the British Parliament to mark the 100th anniversary of the British Mandate, and you shared your experiences of being a Holocaust survivor, but also the horrors of what you went through during the British Mandate. But can I start off with, firstly, your story, that you were born in Warsaw, in Poland, in 1934. Can you tell us your early memories and something of your Jewish family in Poland?
Well, we were a very rich and Zionist family. also in a way a little bit religious. I was all the time watched by a German nanny that was brought from Danzig to Warsaw, and everything was forbidden. I couldn't touch this, I couldn't run, I couldn't make anything which she didn't want. And I was the youngest son of 2 brothers and 2 sisters. My eldest brother, when I was the age of 4, came back from Italy as a surgeon to Poland. Between me and him, there was a difference of 31 years. And he was working in a hospital in Warsaw. I had a very good time, and of course, as a difference between my brothers and my sister and myself, age-wise, I was a spoiled child, a very spoiled child. And I remember only good things from that period until the 1st of September 1939, when I was 5 years old.
And what do you remember then on the 1st of September with...
Well, first of all, I remember that my father and my 2 brothers, they escaped from Warsaw because my father knew that he was on the blacklist of the Germans. So even before they started to fight, he escaped already from Poland to the Russian part of Poland, because there was an agreement between Russia and Germany to divide Poland, and he escaped to the Russian part of Poland. And I stayed with my mother and my 2 sisters in Warsaw in a beautiful house with a beautiful cellar. And I remember the bombardment that started on the 2nd or the 3rd of September 1939. And on the 22nd, and we were, of course, when the bombardment started, in the cellar, because there was everything in that cellar. And on the 22nd of September, the Germans conquered Warsaw. We went back to our house from the cellar. I looked out of the window. I saw already German troops, Nazi, SS, Gestapo. And one thing that I didn't understand actually then, what it means, but I saw a Jew with peot, which I don't know how you call it in English, walking the street, and 2 Germans, I don't know if they were Gestapo or SS, came and started to cut his bird and his peot. For me, it was a game. I was a child. And actually, this game, I was playing with a friend of the other house, also a Jew, my age. Once he was the Gestapo and I was the Jew, and once he was the Jew and I was the Gestapo, we were cutting actually the peot and the bird onto the other. So for us, it was a game. But the situation started, I actually do not remember because I was 5 years old, but the situation started to be very bad. There was no problem of food because we had everything we needed. And suddenly, a man came into our house, he spoke to my mother, and after about 2 weeks, we went down from our house with only few things. It was around middle of November, end of November, bitter cold already in Warsaw, on a carriage with 2 horses, and we started to drive out of Warsaw.
And that was Shaya Harit, one of the most remarkable men that I've ever had the pleasure to meet or interview. Not only did he survive the horrors of the Holocaust, he was also part of the Exodus ship that got raided by the Royal Navy just prior to Israel's re-establishment as a modern state. He went on to be a colonel in the Israeli Air Force. He took part in courageous missions in the Six-Day War and also in the Yom Kippur War. He is a true hero of Israel and the Jewish people. Len, I can't tell you, the greatest privilege of my life in broadcasting is interviewing these Holocaust survivors and for them to share their remarkable story. But as we are actually marking 80th anniversary this year of the liberation of Auschwitz-Birkenau, it's also the 100th anniversary of Hitler's book Mein Kampf. And we know that that book became the ideology of the Nazi regime, and at its core was absolute Jew hatred. Just share with us the kind of danger of not confronting Jew hatred, as we've learned in German history and German society, that it took hold of the entire nation. And of course, we saw evil rise that we haven't probably ever seen before in the history of this world with the Nazi regime.
Well, you know, I'm ashamed to admit it, but you know, anti-Semitism has one of its roots in the church. And if you read church history, you'll see that the church was responsible for accusing the Jews of God killing, deicide, and Christ killers, they were called. And out of that grew this hatred of the Jewish people. And you know, that's a big stain on the church. And of course, Martin Luther wrote a book about the Jews. It was entitled The Jews and Their Lies, which was promoted by Hitler. So here we have a man who's esteemed highly in the Reformation, who writes a book that Hitler uses to justify some of his actions. And you know, it's not surprising that the church is held with a lot of suspicion by the Jewish community and Israel, because we have let them down where we should have identified them as our brothers and sisters. We've turned our backs on them. We put our heads in the sand. The church during the Second World War, where was it? It wasn't doing very much. It was not speaking up or speaking out, and it should have been doing. But you know, we're thankful that today, you mentioned about what a privilege it was for you to interview these Holocaust survivors. Well, one of the crowns of the jewel of the work that we're involved in is the Holocaust Survivors Home that we run in Haifa, and we care for over 45 Holocaust survivors. And it is one of the greatest privileges that as an organization that we as Christians can care for these dear people who are in the last days of their lives, but show them love and care and concern and provide for them in a secure environment so that their last days are sweet and full of kindness, full of love. And so, you know, I'm thankful that we're living in a day when we are seeking to put right some of those wrongs of centuries gone by.
Absolutely. It's an incredible project. And as Zalmi, when we look at the final solution, and this was the Nazis' plan to annihilate European Jewry and then go on to eliminate world Jewry, share with us how this could not have happened without the Nazi collaborators who collaborated with the Nazis. And also to think as well that figures came out recently that between 750,000 and 1 million people took part in making the Holocaust happen, which Hitler and the Nazis couldn't have done that without the collaboration. Share with us how it's not only the Nazis who are to blame for the Holocaust, but also the collaborators across 22 different countries in Europe.
Well, I mean, we can look at it through the prism of where we're living at the moment. We hear all about these useful idiots demonstrating and so forth. I mean, you know, you see these pictures of hostages being torn down almost everywhere, with the exception of the most Jewish areas where there's so many Jews that if somebody actually tore a picture down, you know, they would get, you know, sat on or whatever. But just imagine you walk through your park and you see a picture of a kitten that's lost or a dog that's lost. Would somebody pull that down? Okay, but someone who's been, you know, taken hostage and is like, you know, 12 feet underground, suffering the most unbelievable abuse for over a year, that's not worth staying up on a wall. So you have accomplices in every generation. And, you know, we say on our Passover Seder night, you know, in every generation, they rise up to destroy us, and God delivers us from their from their evil. And I laugh when I hear things like final solution. Everybody's had a final solution for us. You know, we've had the Babylonians, we've had the Romans, we've had the Greeks, we've had all comers, and they're no longer here. And not a single one of those has either survived, let alone survived speaking their own language after 3,000 years, in their biblical homeland after 3,000 years. The bottom line is we survive, okay? We survive despite anti-Semitism, which will be with us for generations to come. I would say that I'm reminded of, I think at the turn of the millennium, the New York Times published a front page of what it would be in 2100, a front page that would be in 2100, and they wrote all kinds of things that might happen in 2100, and or maybe it was 2200 or 2500. It was a long way in the future, and in the bottom right-hand corner was the usual was Sabbath times, right, and the candle lighting times. That even in 200, 300, 400, 500 years, there would still be Jewish Sabbath and Jewish candles lit on a Friday night, no matter who comes to destroy us. And I think that's the most powerful lesson.
Absolutely, definitely. And then, I know you touched on it earlier, but we also have to acknowledge how church replacement theology or replacement theology or supersession theology has really contributed to a Christian Jew hatred over the last 2,000 years, and which really did prepare European nations to actually collaborate with the Nazis. Because, you know, when we look at the hatred during the Second World War, there were Poles. The Baltic states were some of the worst nations to collaborate with the Nazis, and the horrors that were committed in Ukraine as well against the Jewish people in Baba Yara with the Nazi operation Barbarossa. Just share with us how it was the theology of the church throughout the Middle Ages that's had such a bad impact on the Jewish people, and how we all need to be liberated that from actually reading the Bible literally for what it is.
Well, that's been the problem, that people haven't read what the Bible says, you know, because the Bible, if you believe the Bible, then you've got to be pro-Israel, pro-Jewish, because God is.
Absolutely.
And it was lovely to hear what Zalmi just said about, you know, in the generations to come, they're going to be there. And that's because I believe that the God of Israel keeps his promises to the Jewish people. And we see that the very existence of Israel today is evidence of that. But as you say, this whole theology that is invasive in the church, and it's almost the default theology in many, many churches, is just something that is so destructive. You know, this coming weekend, I'm actually going to Bournemouth to speak to a church that holds a replacement theology position, and I'm going to just simply say, read the Bible, because the Bible says, you know, we've got to take the filters off, and the filters of our minds, filters that we read everything through and just read it for the facts. It's the Word of God, and we've got to not play around with it. So, you know, replacement theology is one of the areas that we're addressing within the organization I work for. We want to challenge church leaders and churches to say, listen, you've got this wrong, 100% wrong. Replacement theology will lead inevitably to anti-Semitism. If not that, just a total ignorance of God's purposes for the Jewish people in the land of Israel. And as Christians, if we believe the Bible, we've got to see that the Bible speaks from beginning to end about Israel and the Jewish people. It's one of the most central themes, and you can't get away from it. So I would say to folks, please read your Bible.
Absolutely, amen to that, including the Old Testament as well.
Yes.
So let's have a look at another Holocaust survivor's story. This is Ruben Catz. I had the pleasure of interviewing him back in 2013. And your family moved into the Jewish Ghetto in early spring of 1941. What were your memories of the Jewish Ghetto?
Well, first of all, as we were packing and preparing to go into the ghetto, I was very upset. I cried and cried and couldn't be consoled. I was told we were going into a ghetto, but I didn't know what the word ghetto meant. In 41, I would have been, I wasn't 10 yet. I would have been 10 in August of that year. This was in the spring. And, but nobody would tell me. I don't suppose my brothers knew either until we were actually in it. And I remember my father saying, you might like it because you will have lots of boys, young boys and girls to play with there, which I didn't have where I lived because we lived out in the country and I had no friends there. So he tried to sort of put my mind at rest, and we had to pack up our essential belongings. We were only allowed to take so much with us. All the nice furniture had been earlier confiscated by the Germans. They came and took what they wanted, and we could only take essential things with us, like bedding, which was very important, pots and pans, and some clothes. We put on as much clothes as we possibly could, although it was spring and fairly warm. But Father advised us that's what we do, that we might be in it for the long haul.
And then in June 1941, you talk about how you sneaked outside the ghetto to actually watch the big panzer divisions coming past the ghetto on their way to invade the Soviet Union, known as Operation Barbarossa. What were you thinking and feeling at the time when you saw all these divisions of German panzer tanks?
Well, we had a roar of engines and motorized vehicle in the ghetto. But at that time, it wasn't too difficult to sneak out of the ghetto. Later on, it was much more difficult. So without telling my parents or anything, I sneaked out, and I took off my white armband with a blue Star of David on it, which you had to wear from the age of 10. I wasn't quite 10 yet, but I wore it. I wanted to wear it, perhaps to appear older than I was, and I was proud of it anyway. So I took off my armband, put it in my pocket, and I sneaked out of the ghetto, and I could observe these large panzer vehicles, motorized vehicles with lorries of thousands and thousands of Germans pouring through the town. It was on a main road, on the Konowska Road, which was heading for the Polish border town of Przemysl, which is on the east of Poland. And we didn't know this at the time. We didn't know what it was about. My father might have suspected something, but nobody knew the reason behind it. Of course, we found out a few days later that Germany had invaded Russia.
And that was Ruben Catz, and his story is absolutely remarkable. Not only did he survive the Holocaust, but he was actually rescued by the Soviet Red Army in Warsaw. And he remembers actually climbing onto a Soviet tank as the Soviets liberated Poland from the Nazis. Truly remarkable man, truly remarkable story. Zalmi, as International Holocaust Memorial Day actually represents the liberation of Auschwitz-Birkenau, share with us your thoughts on the biggest of all the Nazi death camps, and why it's so important that people like yourself actually visited Auschwitz. I haven't visited Auschwitz. I've been to Bergen-Belsen in Germany, but they're important to go to and actually see what took place.
Well, strangely enough, for someone who's a son of a Holocaust survivor, and I haven't even seen Schindler's List. I don't go to Holocaust movies. I don't read Holocaust books. Why did I go to Auschwitz? Because I read in the newspaper that the Israeli Air Force was going to overfly the death camp. I'm into defiance. This is what interests me. So, for example, October the 7th, I deliberately avoid listening to stories of hostages because I don't have to live that. I don't want the enemy to get into my head. There's no free rent in my head. If I got anything in my head, it's defiance. It's the state of Israel, it's our survival, it's bombing Hezbollah, it's creating this entire change in the Middle East and Syria. It's dealing with our enemies the way we only know how. Okay, that's what I have time for. So I went there, and it so happened that the leading pilot was also the son of a Holocaust survivor, and it was one of the most moving experiences that I've ever had. But when you think about it, the numbers are so immense. There's a million Jews were killed in Auschwitz during its 5 years of existence. And at its peak, they were killing 14,000 Jews a day. Just imagine, go to find your biggest slaughterhouses in the United States, you know, and think, did they kill 1,000 cattle, 1,200 cattle, 2,000, whatever it is? 14,000 a day. This is an industrial scale. It is so vast that one could say people could not comprehend that today. But today we are learning this again. We're seeing how propaganda, now multiplied by the internet, can dehumanize an entire people. And you can't kill 14,000 people a day if you haven't dehumanized them first. And that's really the problem that we have today in society, is dehumanizing people. We have to give life and living people much more dignity. They're just not numbers. Everybody has a life, everybody has an entitlement to life. Unfortunately, the Islamist trend, which is driving a lot of this propaganda, is something that celebrates death. And that's the basic difference between Judeo-Christian and the Islamists, which is a life and death struggle.
Absolutely. And Len, reminder of viewers that Israel experienced their own Holocaust on October the 7th, whereby decades of indoctrination of hatred against the Jewish people and the state of Israel through the education system that firstly started with the Palestinian Authority led to the horrors of October the 7th, the biggest massacre of Jewish people since the Second World War, which was over 80 years ago, that 1,200 Israelis and foreign nationals were murdered, between 6,000 and 7,000 were injured, many of those critical, and also 250 hostages taken back to those hellholes in Gaza. And from that, we see this pandemic of Jew hatred, not only in this country, but also around the world.
Well, I'd like to say I was shocked by the response to October the 7th, but actually it didn't surprise me because, as you rightly point out, that within the extreme Islamic teaching, there's this hatred of the Jewish people and almost a command to try and kill them. And that's what we've seen, what we saw on that day, and even days since then. There's been many attempts to kill Jewish people in Israel particularly. And I think really as Christians, this is one of those times when we need to be out there standing alongside the Jewish people. I've had the privilege, if I can call it that, of standing with them on some of their protests and rallies in London, just to say, listen, you're not alone. And I think it's so important that we as Christians are prepared to stand up and stand out and speak up, because these things will happen again and again. And we need to be there for our Jewish friends. We need to be there to speak up. But you know, it was one of the most horrific days of my life. You know, I wasn't around during the Holocaust, but what happened on October the 7th was the nearest thing that I've seen that could be called a Holocaust, a mini Holocaust, just the way it happened. And to our shame, we allowed in our country a weekly march against the Jewish community in Israel, promoting Jew hatred, promoting Israel hatred, and we as a nation have not stood up against that. And it's shame on us for that.
And here is our final interview with a Holocaust survivor, Jack Kagan, that was actually filmed in the Imperial War Museum back in 2012.
Now, out of the 250 people 170 survived.
Amazing.
Most of them went to the Belsky group,
Yes.
which we knew approximately where he was operating. Myself and a friend of mine, who again had missing toe on one foot, they managed to cross the road again, to go into this little forest, and we went back not knowing that Doketch's house, Bobrovsky's house, is already burned down. We came there, we saw the house burned down, and we went into just a place where we were able to hide. My feet, the wounds opened up completely because through the torn shoes I could see blood on the outside. In the morning we saw shepherds walking about a little bit lower. They laid through the night there. They laid through the night. In the morning we saw the shepherds. The following evening I went to the nearest farmer to ask for food. When I escaped, I went into the workshops and I stole a cover from a gun and I carried it outside, but I didn't need it. I knocked on the door, the farmer came out. They asked him for food. He gave us a loaf of bread, a small loaf. We broke it in half, one half from me, half from my friend.
Wonderful.
He gave us milk, and he told us, are you aware that the camp has escaped? The Jews have escaped. We didn't answer him, and the Germans are chasing after that. Because we went 180 degrees around the town, we couldn't see anybody, we couldn't hear anybody, we didn't know anything. And so we walked for, I think, for about 4 nights. On the early morning, we saw a horse and cart, and from far away, when it was nearing to us, we heard Yiddish being spoken. We came down and we recognized the people from Novogrudek. And they took us to the Belsky camp.
Wow. And the Belsky camp was run by the Belsky brothers, particularly the leader, Tuvia Bielski, who was made famous by the recent Hollywood film Defiance that starred Daniel Craig. What was it like to escape from the ghetto, escape from the hands of the Nazis, and there before you see a Jewish partisan group, you see these magnificent men of bravery and courage with guns and machine guns and horses.
I can never describe it now. It's a humanly impossible way to describe, because there were 2 camps at that time. We were, strange enough, we were very not far from a German garrison, which was guarding the bridge over the river Nieman, which I couldn't understand. How can partisans be so near to Hutashklanna, where the Germans are guarding the bridge? It was a group of people. There must have been about 360, 380 in this particular camp, all with rifles, machine guns, and so on. That was a fighting group. All tall, twice as tall on horses, sitting on horses, coming from a mission or going to a mission. And I stayed with my cousin. It was just before we escaped, 26th of September, so it was just after the Jewish New Year.
Wonderful.
And that was Yom Kippur, in fact.
Yes.
They were preparing to go to a mission to ambush a German, which lorries will pass by. As it happens, the information was not correct, and they came back with nothing. But after a few days, an order came out from the Russian general that they must all non-combatants plus 180 fighters must go to Naliboki Forest. Naliboki Forest was about, I don't know how many kilometers was away, but it's a forest which is 40 miles by 40 miles. That was in August 42. The Germans raided the forest and they didn't benefit anything. It was such a place.
Can I ask you, what was it like to meet Tuvia Bielski, the leader of the Jewish partisan group? What kind of man was he?
I just saw him. I couldn't meet him. I couldn't be introduced to him. But he was tall, a giant of a man with very strong vision, very strong character, but he had good helpers behind him.
And that was a few years ago, but an extraordinary interview there with Jack Kagan telling his story of being rescued by the Jewish partisans groups, made famous by the film Defiance. Definitely worth watching. Zalmi, one topic I think we have to make, that we are 80 years on from the liberation of Auschwitz-Birkenau. It's marked by the International Holocaust Memorial Day that was designated a day by the UN back in 2005. And yet, 80 years on, Jew hatred is out of control. Essentially, we have a pandemic of Jew hatred ever since the horrors of October the 7th. But share with us how a Holocaust education doesn't seem to be enough in order to counter this rise of Jew hatred. And has our societies, our nation, forgotten the horrors of the Holocaust? That what starts with the Jewish people never finishes with the Jewish people? And if we allow the Jewish people like yourselves to suffer and face hatred, violence and attacks, then this becomes the ultimate threat to our society, our way of life, our own democracy and our very freedoms.
Well, you started off by the United Nations. That United Nations is supposed to be a beacon of, or an example to civilization and all the benefits of civilization. And it is the biggest anti-Semitic club in the world. It's unbelievable that of all the nations in the world, and there are plenty of rogues, Israel gets condemned more and gets sanctioned more than all of the rest of them put together. It's a total disgrace, and it's on public display. So until the institutions of the world start showing an example, how do you expect the ordinary population, the media, academia, how do you expect it to filter down? It has to come down from the top. And I think the United Nations has to be remade into a kind of like a league of free nations or a league of democratic nations, and to show an example. You know, at the end of the day, we're seeing everything repeated, and as you rightly say, society is breaking down. You know, our streets are not what they used to be because of all of this hatred that is allowed to roam freely in the streets. And I often say, the Jews have some place to go. I'm a British Jew. I have some place to go. But where will the ordinary English people go when their country is no longer able to be lived in safely? Where?
That's a very good question that we all need to take to heart. And Len, I mean, it's incredible. 80 years on from the Holocaust, we have International Holocaust Memorial Day. We have films made about the Holocaust. We have TV dramas. We have books. We have our news feature interviews with Holocaust survivors to mark International Holocaust Memorial Day. It's in our newspapers, and yet there seems to be a disconnect between Holocaust education and this pandemic of Jew hatred, almost a disconnect, believing that the Jewish people and anti-Semitism is the reason why Hitler did what he did.
You know, as Christians, we've got to recognize something which is vitally important, and that is that there is a spiritual dimension to this. You know, that some people don't believe in the devil these days, but I believe he's very active, and he hates the Jewish people. He is the senior hater of the Jewish people, and he influences people's minds and attitudes, even Christians' minds and attitudes with regards to the Jewish people. And there is a spiritual battle that needs to be won. And you know, one of the things that we are doing within the International Christian Embassy is spending a lot of time in prayer, a daily prayer meeting worldwide for 2 hours every day, which has taken place every day since October the 7th, to pray against these evil forces that are seeking to destroy the Jewish people. And as Zalmi said, it might be the Jewish people, they've got somewhere to go to for safety. They've got Israel. Where do we go as Christians when the tide turns against us?
And coming to the end of the program now, so Zalmi, what message do you have to our viewers to stand up and support brave and courageous Jewish men like you, and also to honour the memory of your father Simcha, who told his remarkable story through this incredible book known as the Yellow Star.
I think we can trace the decay of society by the decline of church and religious attendance. I mean, this is the problem. We need God in our lives, whatever religion we may be. We need God in our lives. And when we spoke about Islamists and so forth, they are a perversion of Islam. Islam itself is, does not espouse this kind of murder and mayhem that goes on in the world. Unfortunately, moderate Muslims simply are too reluctant to stand up and be countered. So I think the important thing is to recognize that we need more of God in our lives.
Amen to that. Len and Zalmi, a great partnership, a great program. Thank you so much. I want to thank you for watching this program today as we mark International Holocaust Memorial Day. It's so important as Christians that we actually remember the lesson of the Holocaust, that what starts with the Jewish people never finishes with the Jewish people. Therefore, we have a responsibility to stand up against Jew hatred, to stand up against anti-Zionism, and to defend the modern state of Israel and the Jewish people. So thank you for watching this week's edition of the Middle East Report.